Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Cafe BTW, a morning gaming podcast. And for the first time ever, as you can see below, we have 3 guests. This is a record on the show. Of course, we're here every Saturday morning. I'm Andy. You know me. But let's introduce from the left to the right on the bottom here. We have Donnie from the Gamers Week podcast. Hello, Donnie. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing well. How about yourself, sir?
I'm doing great. Ryan, who is a returning guest, friend of the show. Friend of everything. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you.
And then Blue, first time guest as well with Donnie, because Ryan has been on the show before. Blue, welcome to the show as well. How are you?
Thank you. Good morning. I woke up early for this, so you should feel special.
All right. That's my job. I just get people up early in the morning. That's kind of like what we do on the show here. I see Mikey loves retro in chat. I saw Snarks. I saw Games with Coffee. What's up, everybody? Remember, I love to say hi to the lives, but remember, I know we have a fan base in the VOD, so thank you all in the VOD world as well. Hello, Katie. Welcome to chat. Today we have a really interesting, pretty different type of show. We're calling it the Retro Roundtable Discussion. At least I am, because we got a really cool group here. Oh, Ducks with the sub at tier 1. Thank you, sir. 3 months. Wow, Ducks, good friend. And then we got Webb, welcome, first-time chatter. Wow, we got a lot of people popping in. A lot of people are awake. All right. So today we're going to, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming on. And it's really cool to kind of have a show with multiple people for once. It's kind of really neat. So really appreciate waking up this morning. How's everyone feeling? That's what I want to hear.
Pretty much.
I have my coffee.
Yeah, same here.
That's good, because this is a coffee morning podcast.
For sure.
So one thing we do on every start of the show is we kick off with a little bit of a backstory. And because we have you wonderful 3 people here, I think it'll be awesome to hear a little bit about your backgrounds. And I mean in your retro gaming, your gaming background, your connection to video games. I want to start with Donnie. And Donnie, basically what I'm asking here is, can you share a story that kind of directly connected to you to video games? Like, what was it from your childhood that you remember connecting you to video games? Was it your dad or mom taking you to the store to buy a game at Funkoland? What was that kind of connection, if you have anything to share?
I mean, I have several significant connections to video games. One of the earliest that I can remember is my stepdad owning an Atari 2600. So growing up in the late 70s, actually, I mean, I could say growing up, I was 2 years old in 1980, but growing up in the early 80s, we had certain electronics that were around that kind of mimic video games. The Atari 2600 was out. You had your ColecoVision and television, all that stuff. But just being introduced to something like that was different than the mundane going outside and playing around on a jungle gym or something like that. It's like I could sit here and engage my brain and be entertained, and it was challenging too. So that was my first introduction into video games, and it took off from there. Whenever we would go to the local mall, my dad would always go to the arcade, and I knew that once we hit that mall, it was a definite, we were heading to the arcade. So I got to spend a little bit of his money playing some arcade games. He was playing in arcade games, and I think his games of choice were Miss Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Q*bert and stuff like that. And as I grew up, it continued from there. I was constantly in arcades all the way through the late 80s and the 90s until they started to decline. And that's my story.
And you wear these cool hoodies, I guess. Is this what you do every day? You go out in these colorful hoodies?
Yeah, I mean that's one of them. That's one that I own. But my outfit is constantly 90s. The high tops, the colorful socks, the acid washed jean shorts. I don't conform to society's way of saying how I should dress. They're like, well, you're 43 years old now. You should be wearing a blazer and a polo and everything. No, thank you. I'll keep it real. I'll wear my old school starter basketball jerseys and whatnot, and I'll be happy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a starter jacket from the 90s still. Go Jets.
Nice.
Because, Ryan, we've had you before, I want to go to Blue first. Blue, give us a little bit of a story from your background. We'd love to hear what really sparked your connection to retro gaming.
So when I was very, very young, maybe like 3 or 4, I remember my dad borrowed an Atari 2600 from a friend. And I tried my very best to play Cubert, and it was horrible. And it was so difficult. That is the worst game, I think. I haven't played it since. It might be great, but that's my memory of it, is that it's the worst game of all time.
On Atari, yeah.
I was never good at Cubert either.
So eventually the Atari 2600 went away back to the friend who owned it. And that was kind of it for a while. And then the neighbors across the street got the NES with the Super Mario Duck Hunt. And I would go over there because they had girls our age and play it all day long. And I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And eventually my parents said, we better get one of those if we ever want to see our children again. So that's how we got our NES.
That's awesome. And that's kind of where it all started for you. And I didn't know, Blue, are you a big collector as well?
Definitely not as big as like Donnie or you, but
right.
We have a nice collection, a nice little collection.
Cool. Thanks, Blue, and thanks as well, Donnie and Blue, for your stories. Ryan, coming to you in the middle, buddy. You probably told us a story before, but I'm sure you got a million. So let me hear a good retro Game Brew story.
Honestly, when it comes to gaming, I think that's probably one of my first memories that I can recollect as a kid, was going over to my grandparents' house, and there was the Atari 2600 was downstairs. My cousins, who were considerably older than I'm, like the youngest out of both sides of my family, they were all huddled around the Atari 2600 playing it. And I remember like watching, call it the first iteration of Twitch, right?
Yeah.
And so they weren't like too keen on letting me play. So I remember after everybody went upstairs and we all had dinner, I stuck down after dinner and figured it out, plugged it in, and started playing the first game I can remember, which was Keystone Capers, which is for the Atari 2600,
wow.
Which I still love today. I love this game. And actually, Gary Kitchen, guy who made this, is on Twitter, super cool, and still interacting with people. So kind of a cool thought process there. But that year, I think what ended up happening with Christmas was that my parents had saw that I was downstairs because they had to go find me, basically. And they're like, "Where's Ryan?" I can hear people yelling around the house. I'm like, "I don't care. I'm going to get through this level." And eventually that Christmas is when we got our NES. So it was probably 89 is when we got the NES. And after that, gaming has been a companion of mine for a very long time, and upwards to Super Nintendo, PlayStation, and so on and so forth. So it started early, we'll say.
It started early. I see a running theme here. I think we're all sort of in the same-ish generation, and the 2600 was like the Kickstarter, and then NES kind of like drove it home, and that's exactly what happened to me as well. I played Kung Fu on the Atari 2600, Pitfall, which someone posted this TikTok of Pitfall, and I'm like, I realized Pitfall is one of the most underrated like classics. And I don't think it gets enough notoriety because Pitfall on the Atari 2600, well above its bar and time, I think. But then I kicked into full gear once the NES came out, and like the rest was history for me. And I see Mikey Loves Retro putting my face in chat. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for sharing stories, because I think it's really cool to kind of hear where it all started for people. And we're kind of, and what I love about you all is that, especially Ryan and Blue, you guys, I met you guys back in the day on Twitter. Like, we kind of met on the Retro Gaming Twitter. And this is before, TikTok kind of blew up. And I know, Ryan, you're on TikTok and stuff with Gamers Week. But what do you guys just want to thought? Like, I think the Twitter retro gaming community for the most part is not as toxic as others. And I think it's more of camaraderie. Do you guys have any thoughts about like how the community has grown in the last few years and where it started? Because I know we met there. Who wants
as far as where it started, I don't know if I have a whole lot of knowledge on it, but I think I joined in 2014 or 2015.
It's pretty early, Ryan.
Which makes me feel old now that you say that. But my start of it was that me and my buddy wanted to start a podcast. We were interested in like doing YouTube stuff, so made this account with the aspirations of eventually doing a podcast together and releasing it. But the interesting part that I find about retro gaming Twitter is often there's a lot of aspects of Twitter that are extremely toxic, right?
Sure.
Depending on the community you go to, there are a lot of toxicity. But it seems to me that, and this is probably true of TikTok as well, that retro gaming a lot of times is focused on nostalgia, right? Where it's an opportunity for people to share experiences, talk about their favorite games that they're involved with that they really like, and also, interact and have discussions. Now, like any community, of course, sometimes those get a little bit out of hand, but for the most part, Twitter, the retro gaming community on Twitter does a pretty good job about just, having a good time, making sure that it's focused on the gaming aspect of it. And that's how I met these two fine people that I podcast with. So I can't complain.
Yeah, I love Twitter, and I'm going to plug it because we're talking about it. They created communities recently, and as you guys know, I created the retro gaming community, and I blasted that around. We're up to 880 members now, and that attests for some of the coolest, awesomest people that I love a part of the community, including yourselves, and we've grown just in like a month we started it. We just did our second giveaway. So if anyone's interested, you could check on my pinned tweet on my Twitter, and my socials are below, and you could join in. Today I asked a question. What's your favorite thing to drink when you game? And I think I'd love to ask Blue. Blue, what's your favorite thing? And I don't mean alcohol. It could be alcohol. But I just want to be clear. It doesn't necessarily have to be alcohol. But what do you like to drink when you play a game?
Got Jaeger bombs lined up, man.
Yeah, if I don't win first place in Mario Kart, Jaeger bomb. No, just kidding. Sometimes it's whiskey. A lot of times it's coffee, or I definitely like the LaCroix. Big fan of the LaCroix.
LaCroix is very popular. Donnie?
It's everything. Beer. I haven't been much into beer lately. It's whiskey. It's scotch. It's tequila or water.
No, we don't drink water as gamers.
Water's for quitters.
Just kidding. I'm a terrible
No
water
H2O.
drinker. Ryan, how about Ryan? I mean, I'm assuming some beers sometimes, right, Ryan?
Well, actually, that's a choice I've made recently, is to kind of cut down on the beer. So
are you retro game not brews?
Well, I still drink coffee, and that's a brew. So I'm going to go and keep that. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Also, San Pellegrino, which I'm a huge fan of, which is hashtag better than LaCroix.
That's awesome.
We really going to do that in public?
Something a rich kid would say.
I personally love drinking Diet Coke. I am a Diet Coke fiend. I know it's probably bad for me, but I could drink
Diet Coke.
I need a Diet Coke when I game. Also, Mikey had said in chat, I feel the Twitter is way less toxic for the retro gaming community. That's right, Mikey. Team LaCroix. Is it LaCroix or LaCroix? Whatever. Webhead, hey, welcome to the chat as well. Team LaCroix. Everyone likes LaCroix. LaCroix? LaCroix? Blue? I don't know.
LaCroix.
LaCroix. Sorry. Well, thanks so much for all the background. Now I want to talk about what you guys are doing out there. Gamers Week podcast, which has kind of just started 3 months ago, and you guys have kind of really taken a hold of especially the Twitter community, and I was lucky enough to be a guest host of filling in for Ryan recently, and I had a great time with Donnie and Blue. It was freaking awesome. And some great topics as well. But do one of you want to give us a little bit of the 1-2 about the Gamers Week podcast? Tell us, actually, I would love to hear how it kind of formed, and then give us a little background on what it's all about.
Who wants to
take it? How about
Blue? Would you want to take this?
How about Blue? You kick us off.
Well, basically, we had all been part of previous podcasts that ended for one reason or another. And Ryan and I had always intended to start another podcast together at some point. And Donnie seemed like the natural fit to join us. We kind of think that 3 people is a good number for a podcast, keeps it a lot of variety, but without so many voices that it gets overwhelming. So here we are today.
Nice. And Donnie, why don't you give us a little background? What do we expect from the content that you guys are putting out? Like what could a viewer that hasn't listened to the Gamers Week podcast and they turn it on, what do they expect?
You can expect a relaxed environment. Okay. It's you come into this podcast and you can tell that the 3 people that are giving you your information, A, we know what we're talking about. B, we have a difference of opinion. We all 3 bring our own opinions to the topic. So you won't get us blowing smoke up each other's asses, so to speak, just to kind of make a show. So if Ryan has an opinion, I'm not going to be like, oh man, yeah, that's totally right. You're totally right, man. I agree with everything you say. No, we all have a difference of opinion when it comes to video games and what we like, and we're not all always on the same page with everything that we like. So it's a different variety. It's a different take on your daily news shows, and we just try to make it fun and entertaining for everybody. It's not like we're just constantly reading the news that's out there and say, there's your news, there you go, because anybody can go on any news outlet and get that information for themselves. You get a funny environment from us as well, and we try to do that every single episode, where we're not bringing you just the news, we're trying to make you laugh and entertain you.
Yeah, and I like how I love the structure. And the reason I said it's like journalistic is because you guys are, you read full articles before you get into the topic, which I really like. I really enjoy it, and I know whenever I'm a guest host on it, I have to be prepared to read because you guys have a lot of reading, which is great. And
You did great.
Thank you. And I had a great time. I think we had a great episode. You guys had some really good topics. Ryan, maybe you could talk about recently you guys had an OG in the space. You guys had Howard Scott Warshaw, who was the guy that was known not only for ET, but of course Yar's Revenge, which is one of my favorite Atari 2600 games.
Absolutely.
What was that experience like talking to him? And tell us just briefly who that is, because I'm sure some people don't.
Excellent. So Howard Scott Warshaw was a developer for the Atari 2600 back in the early 80s. So he had joined Atari in 1980 and then worked with Atari, I think, all the way up until 1984. And he's got a lot of really cool accolades to his name. So for one, every single game that he ever produced was a million unit seller. So that's Yar's Revenge, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and ET. Even though many of those cards came back officially, it's more than 1 million. So he can tout that. There's a lot of other kind of firsts that he was involved with. For one, he had to produce ET in 5 weeks, basically. So create an entire game for Atari in 5 weeks time. And typically when it comes to Atari 2600 games, it take about 6 to 10 months to produce. So if you want to talk about a truncated timeline, this guy had experienced the ultimate crunch session, if you will. And I've been a fan of him for a very, very long time. He wrote a book recently called Once Upon Atari, which is a fantastic read if you're into gaming history, but also it's structured so that the person who isn't a huge buff when it comes to video games can still learn something from the experience. He talks about some of the trials and tribulations that he went through, his mentality, and his eventually he got to the point where he became a therapist for people like him in Silicon Valley. So
I'm not laughing at him. I just think that's funny to mention,
right.
It's
to the point where he's like, you know what, I got to give something back. And he does. And so he refers to the fact that he's a good therapist for the hyper intelligent because he speaks nerd. So right. But it was a fantastic experience. Howard is really, really great. Getting a chance to have him on the show, just asking some questions about, things that he had talked about in the book and his previous history behind his experiences at Atari. The guy has lived a truly cool life. And we were so, so happy to have him on the show. And in fact, after, he kind of signed off, we all kind of went like, wow, that was so cool.
It was
time
really cool. Yeah, because sometimes when you talk to people who are used to being in the spotlight and have been famous for a really long time, they're kind of jerks. But that we didn't think that was the case at all with Howard. He was very, very nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, I knew a lot about him. And then Mikey referenced Atari Game Over, which was a really good documentary. And I think he was featured in that. Mm-hmm. Hey, Eppo, how are you? Finally able to catch a show. Awesome. Yeah, great show to catch, by the way. I love the episode. I think it's really cool to have guests like that. I think something similar for me is when I interviewed Daniel Pacina. I don't know if you guys know who Daniel Pacina is.
Yes.
Master Pacina. He's the original Johnny Cage. And, when you have these OGs that are so tied, because Howard is so connected to like the early days and like is so part of like the famous video game Crash, and Daniel Pesina is part of literally being the choreographer for the original Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. And I learned a lot about his story because he got screwed over sort of in his own right. Not in a way that I guess Howard got screwed too, because the timeline was ridiculous.
Absolutely.
But it's really cool to hear these like early stories about, you know, the history of gaming, because like if it wasn't for these individuals, we wouldn't have the Mortal Kombats of today. We wouldn't have, you know, I don't think the boom of the video game generation would have happened unless Atari failed like they did, you know? I was asking you guys off the podcast, what would have happened if Atari succeeded? What would have happened if an ET was actually a good game? And I think, Blue, you mentioned that it probably would have crashed still in some form or fashion because...
Yeah, Atari was riding such a high and making so much money that they were just throwing games out left and right, and the pressure was getting higher and higher to kind of maintain that crazy high that they were on. And if it wasn't Atari that sunk the boat, it would have been something else that would have come out relatively soon after that.
Yeah, and could we expect some more awesome interviews like that in the future? Like, what's his name? The creator of Zelda, like Morimoto? You guys bring him
Miyamoto would be awesome.
Me and Miyamoto are on a first name basis, so yeah, I expect that any day.
Actually, I heard he's like, he doesn't do interviews very often. He's one of those, but man, you know who I would have loved to interview, who unfortunately passed away, was Iwata, you know, the old president of Nintendo. Because he was like a true like programmer, became a businessman. His history was so fantastic. I would have loved to sit in a room with that guy. But that's what the power of podcasts, especially gaming podcasts, do for us, is allow us to give you those perspectives. And I think that, you know, I'm excited to see what other guests you guys bring on the show. And thanks so much for doing that. And Genzo, I think we have all their links. So if you don't have any experience with the Gamers Week podcast, we have their links available. Light says, without any regulation, it was just a matter of time and they were on the good green. They made more Pac-Man carts than systems owned by a lot. Yeah, they over-manufacture.
Yeah, definitely.
Duck says, Shiggy, that's my guy. I'll give him a call.
Thanks, Dux.
Let me hit him up on the rotary.
That's your boy. Cool. Well, that's a little bit about background. I have a little bit of a news article to talk about, just to kick off in the middle of the show here before we do a little bit of a roundtable discussion with some more kind of like nostalgic questions I have ready to go. E3, everyone. E3 is officially canceled digitally and physically. Last year, they canceled physically, but they had the digital event. Now, just for some history, guys and gals, I have been going to E3 since like 2012. So I've been at E3 a very long time. It's something that meant a lot to me. And over the years, even before the pandemic, the E3 event started to change, where Sony was no longer on the floor. Microsoft pulled out as well. And then they let consumers buy tickets to come to the show. So first, I want to hear, did you all enjoy E3s in the early days when E3s were so important to the industry, where this is the announcement time? This is when you heard what was coming out. What did E3 mean to you all? I'll start with Blue. Did E3 have any meaning to you, Blue?
It was more just a fun thing to kind of keep your eyes on and see what was coming up. Definitely before I was doing news podcasts, it was always just kind of a casual watch for me, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing gamers kind of come together and get hyped for stuff. I think it was, at the time, it was a nice thing for the community, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Ryan, how about you?
For me, it was kind of like the quintessential experience in regards to what's coming up. So I would spend time focusing on it. Really, to me, like at the time, I wasn't, and subscribed to a whole bunch of like gaming magazines and stuff like that. So really, E3 was my source of information. And then eventually, that fun kind of waned a little bit as I think companies began to do their own announcements. Like, as soon as a Nintendo Direct drops, they do quite a few, these a year. So it took away some of that, how would I put it? Like allure around E3, because it was just another announcement show is what it felt like. And so, as time has progressed, that excitement has certainly waned for sure.
Donnie?
Well, when you think about the mid to late 90s, before the internet was really widely adopted, I mean, that was the gaming magazines that we had. That was our only source of this kind of information for the people that weren't able to go to E3. And then as the years moved on and the internet started to become more available, obviously the video game magazines from the 90s, they fell off and whatnot. And people, you didn't have to buy a magazine now to get that kind of information. You just have to pop open a web link and say, oh, okay, this is the stuff that was announced. And this was like this was the main place where all these different companies went to announce their games. And just like Ryan said, they started to kind of pull away and do their own announcements. Now Nintendo has their own Nintendo Direct. So why do you even have to go to this other conference to make your announcements when you have so many different people following you and they want what you have? They don't need to go to this conference. And I can kind of see why Sony and Microsoft, they're big technological giants in the game industry. They don't need to be a part of this anymore. And maybe E3 turns into something where it's just like the indie developers or smaller game studios coming together to pitch their stuff. And it's no longer any of the big names. I don't know.
Yeah, so I will, and I'm going to read, Mikey Loves Retro said, E3 events have changed too much that I don't even look forward to it, which I prefer the individual companies like Nintendo and Sony to do their own thing.
Absolutely.
Now, just to give you guys some perspective here, I used to produce a show called YouTube E3 Live, and this is actually me in 2019, the last E3, doing the show. And if you remember, YouTube E3 Live was a show that was launched right before the opening of E3, and Jeff Keighley, who, there I am with Jeff Keighley. Look at a young sprite Andy over there. I would be his producer. And what was so amazing about the show was leading into the event, I'd meet all the developers, publishers, whether it was Bethesda, people with Sony or Microsoft, and they were like talking about their new games. As much as the internet had kind of taken a hold of it, there was still a special place in my heart personally with E3. And I still think that I really hope that what I think might happen is we've been so locked in Zoom calls, being stuck inside, that I think not only with E3, that I think in-person events are going to make a huge comeback in the next couple of years.
Oh, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Even though E3 canceled it this year, they did say that it's going to come back in 2023, bigger, better, and badder. And I think they have a chance to think about the show. And even though it's in person and we're in this like digital age, how do you revamp the show to make it good again and get people excited? Is it going to be more of a fan event, like a Comic-Con? Is that the answer? Or is it trying to like go back to the business industry event it used to be? Because there was a time where you had to get someone's badge to get in and like experience it. But honestly, me personally, just because I've been so connected to it, I really hope it comes back in a physical form. I just went to GDC. I don't know if you guys are familiar. GDC is the Game Developers Conference. And I work for Stand Up to Cancer, so I'm able to get into events as like, whether it's media or stuff like that. And I can't tell you how cool it was to be on a floor interacting with developers directly. And I know the whole digital thing is great and all, but don't you think that there's going to be a potential for this boom of people wanting to go back to events? I think, does anyone have a point there? Or
I think if there's one thing that in-person E3 has that the digital shows don't, is those really great unscripted moments that happen when people are up on stage faced with an audience. Like if you think about the Game Awards last year, where it was that digital only show and how sterile and boring it was. We need those kind of in-person moments that give us the stuff like You're Breathtaking with Keanu Reeves and that kind of thing.
Well, that was classic.
My body is ready.
And
exactly.
That was in 2019, I think. Or was it 2018? Might have been 2018. I don't remember.
Or when the president of a company comes up and just says $2.99 and drops the mic and walks off.
That's right.
Right.
And everybody loses their shit.
You don't get that with a Nintendo Direct or a Sony State of Play because they're so scripted and controlled. The live events have the opportunity for something exciting to happen, and I don't think you can get that anywhere else.
One that I really liked was when the head of Microsoft showed a tattoo. Let me pull it up. I don't know if you guys ever remember this, but he was announcing, I think either it was, let's see, he literally got a tattoo on his arm to announce Grand Theft Auto 4 was coming to the Xbox 360. I don't know if you guys remember this, but this was, and that is a real tattoo, by the way.
I don't know
Wow.
about that. White does not show up on.
Dude, he showed
Pin.
these like later in a later interview. He also has a Halo tattoo because he announced Halo 3 as a tattoo or Halo 2 as a tattoo.
I'd like to see if that's still on his arm.
I saw an interview like after the fact and he showed it, but it does look kind of fake, right? But
Yes, it is.
the whole idea.
Imagine getting fired though from that job and always having to look every morning at the tattoos that you got.
Well,
Thanks for
actually,
crunching on this title. Now we're letting you go.
Well, actually, Peter Moore, he was a legend in the space. He helped kind of like he did a lot of stuff with Sega and the Dreamcast and stuff like that. Then he went to Microsoft. Then he went to EA. And then, believe it or not, he went to be the head of one of the European soccer teams in the UK, I believe. And he's not even in video games anymore. But really an OG in the space. But he was a good example of you'd want to see his press conference live and like experience a moment like Blue had said. But I think I'm just a little bit more sentimental to the event because I was, actually
You've had so much involvement with it.
Yeah, so there's like kind of like that tie into it. So yeah, but I hope that in-person events still have a presence because look, we're humans. We can't be on Zoom calls for the rest of our lives. I've been working remote for 2.5 years or 2 years. You think I like being stuck on Zoom all the time? Not really anymore. I need to, even though we're on Zoom right now, not
Speak of the devil.
So my office just started welcoming back people to the campuses. So, and I've taken some of the opportunities to go back, even though my entire team is not there yet. I'll go in there. There are people that I've known that have shown up. So it's nice to actually get on site face to face and have that physical confrontation with people, and not confrontation in a bad way, but physical involvement with people, getting to kind of feel the energy coming off of them when you're having a conversation, and there's nothing can beat that. Nothing can replace that.
Yeah, and also all the free swag and stuff. I love that.
Yeah,
definitely the t-shirts and all that stuff. Well, cool. Well, I guess we'll see what happens. And I don't know if this is a topic for a future Gamers Week podcast. I know the news dropped yesterday, I think, about the cancellation, but I thought it'd be a really good topic as well. But we're going to move into the back nine of the show. And I have what I'm calling a retro gaming discussion where I just have some random questions for you all. And the first one I'm going to hit you with, and Blue, we're going to start with you, all right? So what if you were stranded on a desert island with no electricity and all you had was a generator and a CRT television? What one system would you take with you, and what one game would you take with you? And you could only have one system, one game, and you're stranded on this desert island. I don't know what you're going to do for food and stuff. I'm sorry. All I know is I'm giving you a generator and a television with enough gas.
Coconuts for days.
Well, maybe it's a solar generator, so you can somehow, I don't even know if those exist, but anyway, what's the one console and the one game you would take with you?
CRT TV, so it better be retro.
Yep.
So I would, my favorite console is the Super Nintendo, but if I only get one game, then I might have to go with the original NES, because then I could take Dr. Mario with me, or maybe Tetris. One of those two, probably Dr. Mario, because I could play that forever.
Could you though? Because probably by the time I pick you up in like 20 years later, you're probably gonna have lost your mind. But I think to be honest though, puzzle game is a smart move. To be honest, because a puzzle game you could definitely play for years on end.
It never ends.
It never ends. I'm still playing Tetris. Ryan, how about you? And thanks, Blue. That was funny.
This is going to be a surprise to no one who listens to the podcast, but Super Nintendo Chrono Trigger, because it's got 13 different endings. So I can space it out,
Until you're rescued, right? You can play Chrono Trigger.
Well, I think though mine, like when I get rescued, I haven't gained any additional skills. Blue, when she gets rescued, gets to go that year to the Dr. Mario World Championships and win because
Right,
that's
and
all
wipe
she's
the
been.
floor with
Right.
everyone.
All right, good pick. And I know you're a huge Chrono Trigger guy. Absolutely. Donnie, how about you, man?
I mean, I'm in the same boat. Super Nintendo is one of my favorite consoles of all time. I like Blue's answer so much that I would like to piggyback on top of that with Tetris, because I do play Tetris. I went to PRGE 2019 and I got to see Mega Retro Man play in the classic Tetris World Championship, and that kind of stoked my
he was in Tetris
my fire.
World Championship.
Oh
Yes,
yeah,
he
man,
was.
he beat
And he was
Jonas.
What?
Yeah.
What? I am sorry
Yeah.
I missed this.
that was a great, and I was actually, unfortunately I was flying back at the time because my ticket, I had to be back for work, and I flew home immediately to fly to Pittsburgh, so I missed his match, but it was definitely a fun environment to see. And I've been playing ever since, and I can start off on level 18. I can transition. I think my highest score is like 500,000. So if I had 20 years to practice, I would probably be able to participate in the classic Tetris World Championship by the time you pick me up. However, I think what I'm going to go with is the PlayStation 2 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City, because I can get lost in that world for hours just listening to the soundtrack, riding around on a motorcycle around Vice City and just listening to the 80s soundtrack that they had. It's, to me, it's mesmerizing and I love it.
Great choice.
So
That's actually a good call, because with Dr. Mario, you only get 2 music choices, and I think eventually that would be a problem.
He's losing his mind.
For me, just recently, I've been, and if you see my TikToks, I do a lot of NES Live.
Yep.
And I've had this really resurgence connection with TNC Surf Designs. And I know it might not be the right choice, but it is for me because I've gotten so good at it that I would want to play it over and over again like I do already. I would love to play the surfing over and over again, max out as much as I can. And just so everyone knows, I've submitted as the 6th person to ever get 999, whatever. I maxed out the score, 999.99 or whatever.
Awesome.
And I did that in what's called Wood and Water Rage, which is when you have to do skateboarding and surfing back and forth. And that would be my choice just because I love this freaking game. And what I've noticed about TNC Surf Designs too is that everyone recognizes it or has played it in their past. Has anyone not played it here, or is it a game that no one has had experience with? Blue, have you played TNC Surf Designs?
Yeah, I own it even.
Awesome. And Ryan, Donnie?
I played it, just not very well.
Right. But that's what I've been noticing. Like, it's a game that people forgot they played. Almost. It's like a game that everyone's played, but not a game that you really think about anymore. But then when you see it, you're like, whoa, TNC.
I spent so much time with TNC Surf Designs as a kid. Was never good at it. Could never skateboard. Always would try to jump and then end up falling off and skinning my knees. Was never good at it. And I haven't gone back and revisited the game since I was a kid. And I do actually have its follow-up predecessor sitting on my shelf someplace.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's my choice. And I think that don't worry, you guys won't be going to a deserted desert island anytime soon, I promise. So there's no like ticket on a plane after this, and you're all heading over there. All right, I have another interesting question for our roundtable, which I asked Twitter community on our retro gaming Twitter is, when growing up, did your parents understand video games, or did they just buy them for you? And Blue, I'm going to start with you again. What was the relationship you had with video games and your parents? Did they like video games? Were they oblivious? Did they have what was their perspective?
Well, when I was very, very small, like I said before, my dad borrowed the Atari 2600, and that's how I figured out what it was, because I was watching him play it. And then when we got our NES, and I was, I don't know, 7 maybe or something, but he would play Super Mario, and he could get to the 4th world. And I was like, oh my God, I wonder if I'll ever be that good at games. But so my early experiences were watching him play, but after that, I don't really remember him ever playing ever again.
Were they supportive in your purchases of video games?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not even a little bit.
Interesting. How about you, Ryan? What were your parents like?
My parents were supportive in my gaming habits, so they were willing to purchase games for me because, of course, I was too young to buy them by myself. But I remember when we got our NES, and this is a story I've told a few times, but my dad apparently that January decided that he was going to check out what the hype was about when it came to Super Mario Brothers, and started playing it and then lost track of time. And it was like 6 a.m. when he realized what was going on. So I was like, oh crap, I got to go to work now after playing this game. So he swore off gaming ever since then. I can't get him to touch a controller.
Wow.
And like my mom, occasionally would play the Game Boy here and there, but she wasn't really big into it herself. But again, they were both pretty supportive. We would go, hey, we want this game for Christmas, and they would mostly oblige, or they would go and ask the guy. And that's how I got Bill Lambier's Combat Basketball. But yeah.
Is Bill Lambier Combat Basketball a valuable game? Is that like a risk?
Not at all.
Okay.
It's like, $2. Yeah. I think complete in box, it's under 20. So.
Okay. Donnie, how about you? Any what was your culture with your parents in video games?
Well, I told you about my stepdad. He
Right.
really liked video games whenever I was younger, and then at a point, I think it kind of stopped. We got our NES by way of me getting in trouble one time. He had an architectural drafting table, and my sister's friend had poked holes in it with an ice pick, had just like kind of stabbed at it. Well, he blamed me for it. And I swore up and down, I was like, it's not me. It wasn't me. And I got whipped with a belt for it.
Whoa.
And then ultimately, the truth came out. My sister's friend admitted to it, and he felt really horrible about what he did. And he took me up to Venture, which was a local box store. And we bought, and I still remember the day, we bought the Nintendo. We got Top Gun, Tiger Heli, and of course, Super Mario Brothers was in that little set along with the official Nintendo Player's Guide. And that's how we got our NES. Now, as far as like any games for Christmas, never got games. My parents weren't well off financially. So I remember my Christmases being more so of the like action figure type, because action figures at that point were really super cheap. You could get like an action figure for $5, $4.95, whatever. So having the money to spend on a Nintendo game, like a $50 Nintendo game, just didn't really happen. So we really, my way of getting new games was either borrowing them from friends or going to the local video store and renting them.
Renting I want to do a whole episode on renting video games and how that culture was, because that was a really interesting culture. Cool. And just to tell you a funny story about my family, my parents were oblivious, but they were really cool. And I have to give it to them for supporting my hobby, even though they didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
A funny story, though, is my parents were getting a divorce. I mean, that wasn't funny, but they were getting
story.
They were getting divorced. My mom met someone new, and my dad met someone new, but I didn't get along with her. And he's like, Andy, we're getting really close. She's going to move in. And I was like really upset about it, and I wasn't comfortable, and I was young. And he's like, I'll buy you a video game. I know it sounds horrible, but my dad's like, I'll buy you something.
I got him.
So the year was 1995 at this point. So I'm like, well, the Sega Saturn's coming out, Dad. And it's super expensive, $400 in 1995. Inflation, maybe that was probably around what, 600, 550, maybe another 100 more if you want to do the math. So my dad guilt purchased my original Sega Saturn, which I still have, based on my future stepmother, who she is my stepmother, and I love her. But that was the deal. I was like, Dad, she can move in if you buy me my Sega Saturn. And as bad as that sounds, I guilted my father into buying my Sega Saturn based on the fact that I didn't like my stepmom at the time. So thank you, Dad. I really appreciate it, because I still have that Saturn, and it's the only surviving part of my childhood collection. So that's my story. And
you saw your shot and you took it.
Yeah, may as well get something out of it.
I was such a spoiled brat. That was such a spoiled brat kind of thing to do. But hey, he was all for it, and we went to a store called Nobody Beats the Wiz, which was like the Best Buy back in the 80s and 90s. And, if you ever grew up in the Northeast, Joe Namath would do all the commercials and stuff.
Yep.
He'd go, Nobody Beats the Wiz. And
I know
also,
that from Seinfeld.
That's where they were mocking the Wiz from.
Okay.
That was all a real store. And in the Seinfeld episode, they were making fun of the Wiz. But there wasn't a guy named the Wiz in the original like Wiz commercials, but they were totally mocking that. So that was kind of like a Northeast cultured electronics store. if you grew up. And Ryan, it seems like you've heard of the Wiz before.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Growing up in upstate New York, and then there was still the Wiz commercials and stuff when I was going to college. So
Wow.
that was still around. Yeah. And then there was like PC Richards and Son.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, all those stores. But yeah, I still remember visually seeing my dad buy the system. And a lot of people didn't have Sega Saturns. I was that Sega Saturn friend that you had, like, oh, Andy has a Saturn. And I see we got Lost in the 80s and 90s. Nobody Beats the Wiz was really small, but they were the cheapest for CDs. Yep. And hey, Will, I think that's Will. Yeah, Will from TikTok. What's up? Welcome.
So if you were a Sega Saturn guy, were you also a 3DO person?
I did not buy a 3DO. My friend had a 3DO, but I was able to play the 3DO.
Because I had a friend who was like, he had every system, and I'm talking about every system. So when he got the Sega CD came out, I was constantly spending the night at his house. When the 3DO came out, I was spending the night at his house to play it. And I think he had a Philips CDI. I don't think he ever had a Neo Geo, but I mean, he had all of the systems.
So that was your rich friend.
He wasn't, and that's the thing. He wasn't really rich. It's just his parents they were super supportive of his video game habit too. So
that was sort of like me. I was kind of in that world. I did have a Neo Geo console, which is very rare, and I got it at Funkoland used. My dad bought it for us used at Funkoland. Yes, I did. And the worst part is that I don't have it anymore. It was like one of those systems that definitely is gone. But I had Baseball All-Stars 2 on my Neo Geo, and I would play that for hours on end every day. We also had just like a bunch of like the really good Neo Geo games, and the cartridge was like bigger than my face, and it was so cool.
I was gonna say, you could do curls with it, right?
Right.
Also, one of the coolest parts of the Neo Geo console is that the controllers were literally arcade sticks. And that was cool as hell because, Neo Geo games were basically arcade games. And when they brought it to console, the fact that you had this huge arcade stick, and you know what was cool about the Neo Geo arcade stick? It had that vibe that, like, you'd move the control stick, you'd feel those clicks, you press, everything felt right, like you were in an arcade. So yeah, I was a spoiled brat, but it wasn't because we were rich. It was just because my parents were cool. And I must say, they made me who I am today, So... bet you no one asked you that question before. So thanks for indulging me, because I think that's important. Our parents influence us, and even I have the friends that. Did any of you have friends that were like punished? Like one of my friends couldn't even play video games. He would only be able to play video games for like an hour on a Friday because his parents like were anti-video games, and I feel like thank God my parents didn't stop me from playing video games because there's definitely people that experience that. Did you guys have any friends that couldn't play video games growing up because of that kind of culture?
I was kind of that friend.
Yeah, I was going to say Blue is.
So Blue, they were like, so how many hours a week were you able to play video games?
We were allowed a half hour a day.
Whoa. You had to put
not even enough time to get it started.
You had to think about what you were going to play in those half an hour, right? That's tough.
Yeah, it was. We definitely had to plan ahead, and considering that there were 5 of us kids in the house, there was a lot of competition for that half hour. It was rough. It's what made me appreciate the Game Boy so much because I could take the Game Boy, go hide in my room, and play as many Game Boy games as I wanted because I wasn't technically on the TV.
That's smart. Yeah, that's a good way. And yeah, I guess interesting, that you had those parents that were really not. They thought it was bad. It was, I always post on TikTok a lot of these anti-news reports about video game violence in the early 90s and how bad they are, or addiction in the 80s. The theme was in the 80s, a lot of news reports were about addiction because people would go to arcades and spend money, addiction. Yeah. And then in the early 90s, it was violence with Mortal Kombat and all this crap. But, we're fine. Look at us. We're okay. We made it.
Semi-functioning adults.
We're semi-functioning adults. Lab says, and only after all the homework was done, all the piano practice and trombone practice was done, and only if I was under punishment for having misbehaved at any time throughout the week. I guess that was your parents. I'm so sorry. Gamer Week Games with Coffee says, took me nearly 7 or 8 months to finish Final Fantasy. I can't read Roman numerals. What's V11 again? Thank you. 7. Oh my God. When it first came out, Mazes and Monsters. Lab says D&D will make your kids kill themselves and worship Satan. That's a really intense comment. Webb says, man, and you couldn't save many games back then, so 30 minutes playtime couldn't get you far. Yeah, it's true, Blue, right?
Yeah, most games didn't beat when I was a kid. I've had to be as an adult go back and replay them so I can actually see the end of all these games because I could never get far enough in 30 minutes.
Can you imagine if you chose Goonies 2 as your game to play for 30 minutes?
Wait, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on which one you pick for your 30 minutes.
That's so funny. All right, we are closing to we're on the 16th hole here on this podcast. I have one more question for you all, and it's more of a general question. You know, we've seen this market for the retro community, and I've talked about it on the show. I had a market expert who I at least think he is, a Retro Dad from TikTok. He talks a lot about the gaming market. What do you guys think about the retro gaming market? And more importantly, the question is, what do you think about the retro gaming community as we keep going forward? Is retro changing where, obviously, depending when you're born, like as in the next 10 years, you know, in Xbox or Xbox 360 or PS3 or PS4, PS5 games will be the retro games of the future? Like, Ryan, I see you nodding. Like, what do you think of the future of this community? Like, how is it going to evolve, I guess is the question.
So the one thing it's often that argument is semantic, right? Where it's what is retro, and that terminology behind what you would consider to be retro video games. To me, it's not like it's classic cars where as soon as something becomes 25 years old, instantly it's a retro game. But it's more just your perspective. What retro games to you are the ones that you played when you were a kid, right? So that community, what's nice about that though is as time progresses and people get into stage in their life when they want to kind of go back and be a little bit nostalgic, there's a great community already kind of ready to welcome in those folks. Because, you know, often what you see is that we started off gaming on the Atari and the NES, and we still continue to game throughout those years. So that's a shared experience, which it's exciting in that sense. But if you want to talk about as far as market is concerned and like pricing and all those things, and retro gaming right now is becoming very, very expensive. But it's modeled, I think, after kind of how the comic book community has done things for years, where, you know, the price and the value of these games that are rare and difficult to find goes up as more people get involved within the space. And eventually it may become where it's super difficult to find some of those games, and they're also super expensive. So there may be some barriers to entry, which, you know, it stinks in that sense, because especially if people who want to play those games, but again, there are other options for those folks. So it's an interesting transition, but it's not surprising, is what I'll say.
Shout out to Manny. Thank you so much for stopping by Manny's Arcade. Appreciate it. Donnie, any thoughts on the future of retro gaming, or how you see this community growing?
I mean, what Ryan said is perfect. It's a perfect definition of what's going on. The retro community, I think, it'll continue to bring in more and more people as they get nostalgic for what they had, the games that they had when they were kids. And not everybody's experiences are going to be the same. So when somebody who says that, like, oh, I grew up on PS3, like I remember playing the PS3 whenever I was a kid, and then you're like, well, PS3, that's not retro, that's not nostalgic. Okay, it's everybody's perspective. Everybody has a different entry point into this whole experience. So I think people are more willing to accept that fact and understand that it's going to encompass almost everything gaming at some point. So just enjoy the experience. And as far as like collecting is concerned, that I thought people, it's really taken off in the past 5 years. I mean, it has gotten increasingly difficult to pick up some of these titles, and everybody kind of thought it was going to die down as the pandemic kind of ended. And that doesn't show any signs of slowing. Older stuff is like Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger used to be a $99 copy loose by itself. Yep. And now I see people selling it for $200. And that's what it used to go for, I think, maybe complete in box. And now complete in box is $1,000. So as time goes on and more of these items become scarce, obviously it's the same thing like Ryan said with comic books. You're not going to find many of them out in the wild, and whenever they do come available, people are going to be like, oh, I need to have that in my collection, and they're going to be willing to pay whatever they want for it.
Yeah, it's getting a little sad because I used to be able to go to a retro store and buy multiple games.
Yeah.
And I'd be able to buy like 10 games, like 5 NES games, 3 Super NES. And now, literally, if you really want a decent game, you're going to be walking out with 1 or 2 games. And that
Yeah,
sucks.
I mean, you could still go to a retro store and buy 10 games, but they're all going to be Bill Lambier's Sports Combat Basketball.
Yeah. That and
Which is an excellent choice, by the way.
And what's really sad is that literally in 2019, I was going to retro stores and buying bulk purchases still, even though the market was kind of changing. But then once the pandemic hit, it just really changed. And I really feel bad for people that want to collect the original stuff. I know emulators are great because they are, in a lot of ways, create preservation around games. But yeah, it's sad. And I don't think the market for the games that we grew up with is going to get better. I just don't think it is. I think it's going to get worse.
Well-
Blue, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead.
The thing that irks me about it all is the influx of people coming in who only see it as a way to make money and who
Right.
don't actually love the games. Like I remember several years ago talking to a guy, we were talking about books and I was like, oh my gosh, I love books. What do you like to read? What do you like to buy? And he's like, gosh, I really would like to collect first editions of classic books. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And he says, yeah, I don't read. I actually don't even like books. I just like to have them on my shelf because they're worth something. Like, no, those things should go to people who care about them, people who have memories about them, people who love them. And that same thing seems to be happening with retro collecting, and it sucks.
And to your point, that actually is what happened as well with comic book collecting, is that it became this thing where you put it in a seal. Like, with comic books, it was was it CGC or what have you, and now it's VGC for retro gaming, or WADA, which come to find out
don't say that nasty word. Wada.
Right.
Yeah, make
But-
sure you bleep that.
Oh, man. I'm not a fan of graded video games. I think it's terrible.
And the thing is, though, that's a prospective market as far as things go, but they're snatching up games that are sealed often in order to make money off of them. And that's kind of the high-end comic book collecting. That's exactly what's happened.
Yeah.
And it's disappointing.
You know what's my argument, though, with graded comic books versus video games is that a comic book is very delicate, honestly. And when you have a comic book from like the early 80s, like it's really hard to want to open it and read it. A video game, though, is like a hard piece. Like I could throw in $100 cart into my NES and feel okay about that. I want to play it. And I think that locking your game away into a box is like crazy. And what's really cool is this guy that I know on Instagram showed, I forgot what game it was, but he sizzled open. He bought a WADA graded game and he sizzled it open. And as a point, like showed it, he sawed open the WADA grading and released it. He freed it like Free Willy.
Now, I will raise a counterpoint to what you said about comic books. I've got 7 or 8 long boxes of comic books because I used to collect. And every once in a while, I will go downstairs and I remember that issue. I'll take it out of its bag and board and read it. So I definitely love participating with my collection and not just having it as shelf candy and looking at it. The same thing with my comic books, same thing with my video games. I will go down there and read my old comic books. I do have several of them that I did get graded at one time. I think it's only like maybe 5. And it kind of sucks because now I can't go back and read that issue. It's encased in plastic. I can't just crack it open and be like, oh, okay, I get to experience that again for the same time. I have to go and try to find a virtual copy of it. And to me, it's not really the same as thumbing through it and reading the actual comic.
Yeah. I'm just hoping that I think that the retro community is very, and you could see in chat, a lot of people are saying like free them from their plastic prisons. And Mikey Loves Retro agrees. And Manny says grading is destroying the hobby. But I think there's a lot of love from people like us that are supporting the non-grading side of it. And I think that there's a lot more of a runway for us to kind of combat the graded side. The people that are buying graded games are rich people that use auctions and buy an auction, and they're not typically retro gamers. They're just buying things that they think are worth money. Did you guys?
Exactly.
Do you know that an original Madden on Genesis, like the first, I think Madden on Genesis sold for like $500,000 on an
Yeah, I saw
auction.
that.
And look, I know Madden passed away, and I know prices on Madden games have gone up a little bit, but never would I ever in my life or universe of existence pay $500,000 for a Madden game.
No.
Okay, like
You mean this one?
let me see. I think so. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that's sold. Dude,
Johnny, are you holding up a gold bar right
throw
now?
that
Basically.
throw that into a graded box, Donnie, and you are
Now-
a millionaire.
Whenever he did pass away, it's got a issue with the flap here. Whenever he did pass away, I did notice that the original John Madden football for Sega Genesis was going for like $300 plus, ungraded raw. And I was like, man, I should really jump on this and kind of sell
Really?
that. But I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to keep that because the hype will die down.
Yep.
And this is, I mean, pretty much almost, I wouldn't say pristine copy because it's got a crease in the back here. The flaps have issues and stuff like that. But I don't really, I think at some point, maybe later down the road when I'm older, and if I ever fall out of love with the stuff, which is highly unlikely, or if I just need the money, then yeah, I'll get rid of it. But now I'm not in this hobby to make money. I'm in this hobby because I
You love
love
it.
video games.
Same
Yeah.
with me. You know, I posted a picture of my Saturn collection, and one of the local stores here, shout out to Game Tower. If you've seen them on Instagram, they're an awesome LA store. He literally DM'd me and says, "Are you willing to sell your Sega Saturn collection?" And for a beat, I was like, but then I was like, there's no freaking way I'm not going to
Right. You're going to lose that connection with that
would-
piece of nostalgia.
I can't do that. There's just no way I could do that. But it was still flattering that I wonder what I could have offered him. But I'm not going to, man, I would sell them and then I would feel terrible that I sold them and be like,
Yep.
you just sold one of the most sought after like collectibles in the gaming industry. Because Saturn American run games are really hard to find. Yeah, really great stuff today. I'm, it's really cool to have a little roundtable here. Thank you so much. So we are closing out. I have a couple of things I want to do before we go. Just give me like 5 minutes here. I'm going to do a rapid trivia for you guys, all right? And I'm individually going to ask you a question and put you on the spot, okay? Ryan, we're gonna start with you, Ryan. Okay?
I'm ready.
What video game franchise has racked over $1 billion in lawsuits over time? What one video game franchise has racked over $1 billion in lawsuits?
Lawsuits.
What franchise do you think that is?
That's a good question.
You got 10 seconds. One.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Mortal Kombat.
Close. Grand Theft Auto has
Oh,
had
okay.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Grand Theft Auto. All right. Let's go to Donnie on this one. What was the first gaming console to have internal memory? Donnie.
That would have been the
No Googling.
Nintendo 64.
That is incorrect, sir.
Was it the Xbox?
It was not the Xbox. It was actually the Sega Saturn with 1 megabyte of internal memory.
There it is.
All right. So let me see. Blue, final question for you. What was the first video game character featured as a balloon at the Macy's Day Parade?
I know this one.
Was it Sonic?
Yes.
Yes, it was Sonic. And then Sonic also blew up at one
The
point.
Bubsy?
Yeah, he hurt a kid and a police officer, if I remember right, on that. Like floated away and like
That led
slammed
to the
into
downfall of Sega.
That was the downfall right after that. I think it actually injured people too.
Yeah, like I said, a kid and I think a police officer had injured, and they recorded it, and then what they played on the live broadcast that was on TV was the like test run for it, because obviously things didn't work out. But apparently it was all over the newspaper.
Oh no.
Yep.
I think they had a balloon this year, or someone had a balloon. I think they had a Sonic, or there might have been a few different ones. And by the way, Sonic comes out next week, Sonic 2, so I hope everyone goes sees it, because I really love the whole Sonic movie thing. And Jim Carrey said this could be his last movie, apparently, from a news report. But I think it was an April Fool's joke. Who knows? Final question for all of you. What year was the NES released?
85.
No. Wait, I'm
Well,
sorry.
If you want
sorry.
to be technical.
I meant Super NES, but yes, correct. Not 85 for the NES.
91.
Yes, 91. I do that a lot where I mean to talk about the Super Nintendo and I never say SNES, I say NES. So I apologize. But that's a good point on the NES. It was 85, but really 86, I think. People were able to get their hands on it.
Yeah.
But
85
yeah,
was the test markets and all that stuff.
but yeah, did you all have a good time today? You know, we're closing out here. I hope you all had a good time with me, you know.
Had an absolute blast.
Definitely.
All right.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, it was
For sure.
fun. Before we go, can you guys just tell us when do we get to see the show Gamers Week podcast? Where do we find it? I know I have a link in chat, but tell us a little bit about that before we go.
So for one, we are an all audio podcast, so feel free to check it out on your favorite podcast app of choice. So iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or what have you. We release episodes every Friday morning. So we are a weekly podcast, of course. So check it out every Friday morning. And we actually every Monday, Tuesday as well, we release a patron only podcast, which is a little bit more risque. So that's strictly for our patrons. But yeah, we enjoy doing this every week, surprisingly enough.
And just so you guys know, I am an advocate for video.
You're an advocate for video. That's right. Hey, there's nothing wrong with, you see, I did years of audio podcasts, and that's why I decided to like do something different where I'm like, I'm going to just do this live and then I'm going to post the VOD and that's it. All said and done. Like, wipe my hands. I've also been like you all, like been in and out of different podcasts and have had my own guest hosts and stuff. So I decided to get rid of the guest hosts and or the actual hosts that I work with and just be my own host, but bring on wonderful people like yourselves. So been wanting to do this for a while. Thank you so much, Blue and Ryan and Donnie. It was really fun talking to you all, and I'm sure the chat had a great time. I see a lot of people had a good time. You know, I guess I like to say one thing before I go. You know, we only get one shot at this, so be nice to people, everybody. That is very important.
Absolutely.
And I will catch you guys on Twitter. We're going to be posting the VOD soon. And I want to say thank you to everyone that's watched on VOD as well. We care about you as well. And everyone that showed up for the live, thank you so much. I could go through all your names, but I'm too lazy to do that. Until next time, we are back next Saturday, and we have a guest, and I'll make the announcement next week. Blue, Ryan, Donnie, thanks again, and have a great weekend. We really appreciate it. Till next time.
Thanks, you too.
I'm Andy. All my socials are below, so we'll see you next time. All right. Bye.
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 Bye. Thanks again, Andy.
You got it.